The year is 2347. Above, the shimmering city of Etheria floated serenely, a testament to humanity's triumph over its darker impulses. Here, nestled within the carefully cultivated orbital ring, the concept of war was as alien as the stars beyond. Children learned of it in hushed tones, relegated to the dusty annals of history, a barbaric practice of a bygone era. Replicated food flowed freely, disease was a distant memory, and conflict resolution was an art form practiced with the precision of a master sculptor. Anya, however, found herself drawn to the darkness, not because she harbored any latent desire for violence, but because she simply couldn't grasp it. A historian by trade, she specialized in the pre-Unity era, that tumultuous period before humanity coalesced into a single, globally minded entity. Her office, tucked away in the Grand Archive, was a testament to her obsession. Data crystals lined the walls, each containing meticulously curated information about the wars, battles, and skirmishes that had plagued the 20th and 21st centuries. That hollow displays flickered with images of ravaged landscapes, terrified faces, and the cold, unfeeling machinery of destruction. Yet, despite her exhaustive research, war remained an abstract concept. She could recite the statistics, analyze the strategies, and dissect the political motivations, but she couldn't feel it. She couldn't understand the primal urge that drove humans to inflict such suffering upon one another. Her colleagues, most of whom focused on the artistic or philosophical achievements of the pre-Unity era, often teased her about her morbid fascination. Why dwell on the darkness, Anya? They would ask. Why not celebrate the light? But Anya couldn't ignore the darkness. She felt that understanding it was crucial to appreciating the peace they now enjoyed. If they forgot the horrors of the past, she reasoned, they risked repeating them. One crisp morning, as the simulated sunlight streamed through the archive's panoramic windows, Anya stared at a particularly disturbing image, a grainy photograph of a child weeping amidst the rubble of a bombed-out city. The caption identified it as a casualty of the Syrian civil war, a conflict that seemed utterly senseless and convoluted to her. How could anyone do this? She murmured to herself, her brow furrowed in frustration. How could they inflict such pain and destruction on innocent people? She reached out and touched the image, feeling a strange disconnect. The emotions were there, recorded in the pixels of the photograph, but they felt distant, unreal. It was like looking at a painting of a storm. She could appreciate the artistry, but she couldn't feel the wind and the rain. Anya sighed and leaned back in her chair, feeling a familiar wave of inadequacy. She had dedicated her life to understanding war, but it remained a mystery, a locked door that she couldn't find the key to. Perhaps, she thought, some things were simply beyond her comprehension. Perhaps the human capacity for violence was a flaw in the species' design, a glitch in the code that had been eradicated in the Unity era, but a nagging feeling persisted. She couldn't shake the sense that there was something more to it, something deeper that she was missing. She felt like an archaeologist excavating an ancient city, finding fragments of pottery and tools, but unable to piece together the full story of the people who had lived there. Driven by this insatiable curiosity, Anya decided to take a different approach. She realized that she couldn't understand war through books and data alone. She needed to experience it, to feel it, to immerse herself in the chaos and the fear, and she knew just where to find that experience. The archive's forbidden simulation vault, a place rarely visited and even more rarely discussed. It contained the most realistic and psychologically jarring recreations of pre-Unity era conflicts ever created. It was a place that held the potential to unlock the secrets of war, but also the potential to shatter her carefully constructed worldview. And Anya, with a mix of trepidation and excitement, was ready to take the plunge. The simulation vault was located deep beneath the archive, accessible only via a rarely used service elevator. The air grew noticeably colder as Anya descended, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The elevator doors hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor lined with reinforced steel doors. Each door was marked with a warning symbol, a stylized image of a human figure engulfed in flames. Anya swallowed hard, her initial enthusiasm tempered by a growing sense of unease. She knew that the simulations were designed to be as realistic as possible, but she hadn't fully considered the psychological impact they might have. She reminded herself that she was doing this for the greater good, to understand the past and safeguard the future. She walked down the corridor, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She stopped in front of the main access door, which was secured with a complex biometric lock. She placed her hand on the scanner, and a red light swept across her palm. After a moment, the light turned green, and the door slid open with a low rumble. The room beyond was vast and cavernous, filled with rows of gleaming VR pods. Cables snaked across the floor like metallic vines, connecting the pods to a central processing unit that hummed with barely contained power. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and ionized particles. But it wasn't the technology that caught Anya's attention. It was the far corner of the room, shrouded in shadow. As her eyes adjusted, she realized that it was a separate, walled-off section. Curiosity piqued. She walked towards it, her heart pounding in her chest. The entrance to the walled-off section was a simple archway, unmarked and unassuming. As she stepped through it, she felt a shift in the atmosphere, a palpable sense of history and decay. The room was smaller than the main vault and much more dimly lit. Instead of gleaming technology, it was filled with dusty shelves and decaying furniture. This wasn't a simulation chamber. It was an archive, a hidden repository of information. Anya ran her hand along the spine of a decaying book. The title was barely legible, but she could make out the words Psychological Operations Manual. She carefully pulled the book from the shelf and opened it. The pages were brittle and yellowed, but the text was still readable. It detailed the techniques used by military strategists to manipulate the emotions and beliefs of enemy populations. She picked up another book, this one titled The Trauma of Combat. It was a collection of interviews with soldiers who had served in various conflicts throughout the 21st century. Their stories were harrowing accounts of fear, loss, and moral compromise. Anya read about soldiers haunted by the faces of the people they had killed, struggling to reconcile their actions with their conscience. She found photographs, not sanitized images for public consumption, but raw, uncensored depictions of the horrors of war. There were pictures of dismembered bodies, of starving children, of entire cities reduced to rubble. She discovered detailed reports on the long-term consequences of warfare, not just the physical destruction, but the psychological scars that lingered for generations. There were studies on PTSD, on the breakdown of social structures, on the rise of crime and violence in post-conflict societies. As Anya delved deeper into the archive, she began to understand the true cost of war. It wasn't just about battles and strategies. It was about the destruction of human lives, the erosion of human values, and the long-term suffering of entire populations. It wasn't just the physical wounds, but the invisible scars that festered beneath the surface. This hidden archive wasn't just a collection of historical documents. It was a testament to the devastating consequences of human conflict. It was a stark reminder of why humanity had chosen the path of peace, and a warning against ever straying from that path. The simulations in the main vault might offer a visceral experience of war, but this hidden archive offered something far more profound, a glimpse into its soul-crushing reality. And Anya knew, with a growing sense of dread, that she was only just beginning to scratch the surface. Despite the chilling discoveries within the hidden archive, Anya knew she couldn't avoid the primary purpose of the vault, the VR simulations. The archive had provided context, a deeper understanding of the why behind the wars, but it hadn't provided the what. The visceral experience of combat. Leaving the hidden archive, Anya returned to the main simulation chamber. The rows of gleaming VR pods seemed less intimidating now, more like a necessary evil. She selected a pod at random, its designation marked as Simulation, Stalingrad, Eastern Front, 1942. A chill ran down her spine. Stalingrad. Even the name resonated with a sense of brutal, unrelenting conflict. She climbed into the pod, the padded seat conforming to her body. A neural interface lowered from the ceiling, gently attaching to her temples. A voice, synthesized but soothing, filled her ears. Simulation parameters loading. Please remain calm. The world dissolved. Suddenly, Anya was no longer in the sterile environment of the simulation vault. She was standing in the midst of a shattered city, the air thick with smoke and the stench of burning debris. The ground trembled beneath her feet as artillery shells exploded nearby, sending plumes of dirt and shrapnel into the air. The screams of the wounded and dying echoed around her, a cacophony of human suffering. She was a soldier, a young conscript in the Red Army, armed with a rifle and a handful of ammunition. Fear gripped her heart, a primal instinct she had never experienced before. She huddled behind a crumbling wall, trying to make herself as small as possible. The simulation was incredibly realistic. She could feel the cold seeping into her bones, the grit of the dust on her skin, the weight of the rifle in her hands. The sounds were deafening, the sights were horrifying, and the emotions were overwhelming. Over the next few simulated days, Anya experienced the full horror of the Battle of Stalingrad. She fought alongside her comrades, desperately trying to hold back the advancing German forces. She witnessed acts of incredible bravery and unspeakable cruelty. She saw friends die, their lives extinguished in an instant. She killed, forced to make split-second decisions in order to survive. The moral compromises were the hardest. She saw soldiers looting the bodies of the dead, stealing food from starving civilians, and even executing prisoners of war. She understood the desperation that drove them to such acts, but she couldn't condone it. When the simulation finally ended, Anya was left shaken and disoriented. She stumbled out of the pod, gasping for air. The sterile environment of the simulation vault seemed jarringly out of place. She felt as though she had just returned from a long and harrowing journey. She tried to process what she had experienced, but it was difficult. The emotions were still raw, the images still vivid. She had seen and done things that were completely alien to her peaceful existence. How could she reconcile the brutality of war with the utopian ideals of her society? How could she explain the senseless violence and the moral compromises to her colleagues, who had never experienced anything like it? Anya realized that she had only scratched the surface. Stalingrad was just one battle, one small piece of the puzzle. There were countless other wars, other conflicts, other atrocities that she needed to understand. But she also knew that she couldn't immerse herself in these simulations indefinitely. She was already feeling the psychological toll, the weight of the past pressing down on her. She needed to find a way to process her experiences, to make sense of the darkness, before it consumed her. She decided to seek guidance from someone who had lived through the pre-Unity era, someone who understood the human capacity for both good and evil. She knew just the person to turn to: Elder Theron, a former member of the Unity Council, a wise and respected figure who had witnessed the transition from a world of conflict to a world of peace. Perhaps he could help her understand why humanity had shied away from war, and what it would take to ensure that it never returned. Elder Theron resided in the Tranquility Gardens, a sprawling complex of meticulously maintained flora and serene water features located on the outskirts of Etheria. The gardens were designed to promote contemplation and inner peace, a stark contrast to the chaos and destruction Anya had recently witnessed. Theron, his face etched with the wisdom of centuries, greeted Anya with a gentle smile. His eyes, though aged, held a spark of intelligence and empathy. He led her to a quiet pavilion overlooking a koi pond, the air filled with the soothing sound of trickling water. "Anya," he said, his voice a low, calming rumble, "I sensed your turmoil. The simulations, they can be unsettling, especially for those unaccustomed to the realities of the past." Anya nodded, her voice trembling slightly. "Elder Theron, I don't understand. How could humanity inflict such suffering on itself? How could we be so blind to the consequences of our actions?" Theron sighed, a sound like the rustling of leaves. It was a different time. Anya, a time of scarcity, of division, of competing ideologies. People were driven by fear, by greed, by a thirst for power. They prioritized individual ambition over collective well-being. He paused, gazing out at the koi pond. The turning point came with the Great Collapse, that a series of ecological disasters, economic crises, and escalating conflicts pushed humanity to the brink of extinction, that we realized that we couldn't continue down that path, that we had to change, or we would perish. But how? Anya asked. How did humanity transition from a world of constant conflict to a world of peace? "It was a long and arduous process," Theron replied. "There was no single event, no magic solution. It was a gradual shift in consciousness, a collective awakening to the true cost of progress. He explained that the first step was addressing the root causes of conflict: poverty, inequality, and environmental degradation. Resources were redistributed, sustainable technologies were developed, and global cooperation was prioritized. But the most profound change, Theron emphasized, was philosophical. Humanity began to prioritize collective well-being over individual ambition. The pursuit of personal gain was no longer seen as the ultimate goal. Instead, people were encouraged to contribute to the greater good, to work together to create a better future for all. We realized that true progress wasn't about accumulating wealth or power, Theron said. It was about creating a society where everyone had the opportunity to thrive, where everyone felt valued and respected. He also spoke about the importance of education and empathy. Children were taught to understand different perspectives, to resolve conflicts peacefully, and to appreciate the interconnectedness of all things. The history of warfare was not erased, but it was presented in a way that emphasized its devastating consequences and the importance of preventing it from ever happening again. We learned to recognize the long-term cost of conflict, Theron explained. It wasn't just about the immediate casualties or the physical destruction. It was about the psychological trauma, the social disruption, and the lost potential that lingered for generations. He looked at Anya, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and concern. We built this utopia, Anya, not because we were inherently good, but because we learned from our mistakes. We understood that peace is not simply the absence of war. It is the active creation of a just and equitable society. Anya listened intently, absorbing Theron's words. She began to understand that humanity's aversion to war was not simply a matter of policy or technology. It was a fundamental shift in values, a conscious decision to prioritize peace and cooperation over conflict and competition. But a new question arose. Had this peace come at a price? Had humanity sacrificed something essential in its pursuit of utopia? And was that sacrifice sustainable in the face of unforeseen threats? Anya voiced her concern, the question hanging heavy in the tranquil air of the gardens. Elder Theron, you speak of a philosophical shift, of education and empathy. But is that all? Can a change in mindset truly eradicate something as deeply ingrained as aggression? The simulations, they felt almost biological. Theron's expression grew grave. He was silent for a long moment, as if weighing the implications of his next words. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. There is another element, Anya point one, that is rarely discussed. He hesitated, then continued. After the Great Collapse, in the darkest days of our history, a group of scientists and philosophers proposed a radical solution, a solution that was both hailed as a savior and condemned as a crime against humanity. Anya leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. What was it? The Genetic Memory Project, Theron revealed, his voice heavy with regret. It was a program designed to subtly alter the human genome, to reduce aggression and increase empathy. Anya gasped, her mind reeling. You mean, humanity deliberately changed itself? Theron nodded. It was a desperate measure, Anya, taken after a near-extinction event. The reasoning was that if humanity was to survive, it needed to overcome its inherent tendency towards violence. The scientists identified specific genes associated with aggression and impulsivity, and they developed techniques to subtly modify them. But isn't that unethical? Anya stammered, struggling to process the implications. Tampering with the very fabric of human existence. It was a profound ethical dilemma, Theron acknowledged. There were fierce debates, heated arguments, but in the end, the proponents of the project argued that the survival of the species outweighed the concerns about individual autonomy. He explained that the modifications were not drastic. They didn't eliminate aggression entirely, but rather channeled it into more productive outlets, such as scientific discovery and artistic expression. They also enhanced empathy, making people more sensitive to the suffering of others. The changes were subtle, almost imperceptible, Theron said. But over generations, they had a cumulative effect. Humanity became more peaceful, more cooperative, more inclined to resolve conflicts through dialogue and compromise. But is this why I can't understand war? Anya asked, her voice filled with a mixture of understanding and horror. Is my inability to comprehend the urge to violence a result of this genetic manipulation? It is a factor, Theron admitted. You were born into a society where aggression is actively suppressed, where empathy is highly valued. Your genetic makeup has been subtly altered to reinforce those values. Anya felt a sense of unease wash over her. She had always prided herself on her objectivity, her ability to understand the past without being influenced by the present. But now she realized that her very perception of reality had been shaped by forces beyond her control. She thought back to the simulations, to the visceral emotions she had experienced. Were those emotions truly her own? Or were they simply a pre-programmed response, a simulation of a feeling that she could never fully understand? The revelation of the Genetic Memory Project cast a new light on everything she thought she knew about her society. It was a utopia, yes, but it was a utopia built on a foundation of genetic manipulation, a foundation that raised profound ethical questions about the nature of free will and the definition of humanity. And Anya knew, with a growing sense of disquiet, that this secret, carefully guarded for centuries, could have unforeseen consequences for the future. The revelation of the Genetic Memory Project haunted Anya. The shimmering towers of Etheria, once symbols of hope and progress, now seemed like gilded cages. The constant hum of contentment that permeated her society felt less like genuine happiness and more like a carefully orchestrated symphony of compliance. Back in her office at the Grand Archive, Anya stared at the data crystals lining the walls. The weight of the pre-Unity era pressing down on her. The faces of the soldiers, the victims, the perpetrators, they all seemed to mock her now, their struggles rendered meaningless by the subtle manipulations of the past. Was this piece a lie? Had humanity traded its free will for a manufactured sense of security? Was their utopian society simply a form of enforced conformity, a collective delusion maintained through genetic engineering? Anya wrestled with the ethical implications. On one hand, she understood the rationale behind the Genetic Memory Project. It had prevented another great collapse, saved humanity from self-destruction. The benefits were undeniable. A world without war, without poverty, without suffering. But on the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that something essential had been lost. The capacity for righteous anger, the willingness to fight for what was right, the very essence of human passion. Had all of that been sacrificed on the altar of peace? She considered the implications for the future. If humanity had been genetically engineered to be docile and compliant, how would it respond to a true threat? Would it be able to defend itself against an enemy that did not share its pacifist ideals? Or would it simply surrender, accepting its fate with a manufactured sense of calm? Anya knew that she couldn't keep these questions to herself. She needed to share her concerns with others, to spark a debate about the true meaning of peace and the potential dangers of genetic manipulation. But she also knew that the Genetic Memory Project was a taboo subject, a secret that was fiercely guarded by the Unity Council. Speaking out could have serious consequences. She could be ostracized, silenced, even subjected to psychological reconditioning. But she couldn't ignore her conscience. She had a responsibility to the truth, to the future of humanity. She decided to confide in someone she trusted, someone who shared her passion for history and her skepticism about the official narrative. Her colleague, Elias. He was a brilliant but eccentric historian, known for his unconventional theories and his willingness to challenge the status quo. She found him in his cluttered office, surrounded by stacks of ancient books and holographic displays. He listened patiently as she recounted her experiences in the simulation vault and her conversation with Elder Theron. When she finished, Elias was silent for a long moment, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "The Genetic Memory Project," he said finally. "I've heard whispers about it, rumors that have been circulating for centuries, but I never thought it was actually true." He paused, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of excitement and concern. "This changes everything. Anya.it means that our entire understanding of history is flawed. We've been studying a past that has been filtered through a genetic lens, a past that has been deliberately sanitized to promote a particular ideology." "What do we do?" Anya asked, her voice filled with anxiety. "Do we expose the truth, even if it risks shattering our society?" Elias smiled, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "We are historians, Anya. Our job is to seek the truth, no matter the cost, that we owe it to ourselves and to future generations to uncover the full story of humanity, even the parts that are uncomfortable or unsettling. Together, Anya and Elias decided to embark on a quest to uncover the truth about the Genetic Memory Project, to understand its origins, its consequences, and its potential implications for the future. They knew that their journey would be dangerous, that they would face opposition from powerful forces, but they were determined to pursue the truth, even if it meant challenging the very foundations of their utopian society. The question now was, where to begin? Anya and Elias began their investigation by delving into the archive's restricted files, searching for any information related to the Genetic Memory Project. They discovered fragmented records, heavily redacted documents, and veiled references to a behavioral modification initiative. It was clear that the Unity Council had gone to great lengths to bury the truth. One evening, while working late in Elias's office, they stumbled upon a coded message hidden within an old research paper. The message was a series of coordinates, seemingly pointing to a location outside of Etheria. "What do you think it is?" Anya asked, her voice hushed with excitement. "I don't know," Elias replied, "but I have a feeling it's worth investigating." The coordinates led them to a remote settlement on the surface of Earth, a place known as the Wildlands. The Wildlands were a sparsely populated region where people lived outside the control of the Unity Council, adhering to a more traditional way of life. They were considered outcasts, rebels, and even dangerous by the citizens of Etheria. Anya and Elias traveled to the Wildlands under the guise of researchers studying pre-Unity-era agricultural practices. They quickly realized that the Wildlands were nothing like the sanitized images they had seen in the official archives. The people were rough, independent, and fiercely protective of their freedom. It was in a dimly lit tavern in the heart of the Wildlands that they met Jax. He was a tall, muscular man with piercing blue eyes and a weathered face. He exuded an aura of intensity and raw energy that was unlike anything Anya had ever encountered. He sat alone in a corner booth, nursing a glass of something that smelled suspiciously like moonshine. Elias, ever the bold one, approached him. "Excuse me," he said. "We're researchers from Etheria. We're interested in learning more about the history of this region." Jax looked up, his eyes narrowed. "Etheria? What would you soft-skinned city dwellers know about history?" "We're trying to learn," Anya interjected, sensing the tension in the air. "We've heard rumors, whispers of a time before the Unity, a time when things were different." Jax chuckled, a harsh, humorless sound. "Different? You have no idea. You live in a bubble, a fantasy world where everyone is happy and content that you've been genetically neutered, turned into docile sheep." Anya and Elias exchanged nervous glances. Jax clearly knew more than he was letting on. "What do you mean?" Anya asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I mean that you've been robbed of your humanity," Jax said, his voice rising. "You've been stripped of your ability to feel anger, to defend yourselves, to fight for what you believe in. You've become weak and vulnerable." He leaned closer, his eyes burning into Anya's. "There are those of us who remember what it means to be human, who refuse to be controlled. That we call ourselves the naturalists. We believe that humanity needs to reclaim its natural instincts, its capacity for both good and evil." Jax explained that the naturalists were a fringe group that advocated for a return to natural human behavior, including the capacity for righteous anger and self-defense. They believed that the Genetic Memory Project had weakened humanity, making it an easy target for any potential threat. Anya was taken aback by Jax's vehemence. She had never encountered anyone who so openly challenged the values of her society, but she also couldn't dismiss his concerns. She had seen the horrors of war in the simulations, but she had also seen the courage and resilience of the human spirit. "What do you want?" Anya asked. "What do you want from us?" "I want you to open your eyes," Jax said. "I want you to see the truth about your society, about the lies you've been told, and I want you to help us prepare for what's coming." Anya and Elias exchanged another glance. They knew that Jax was a dangerous man, a radical who could potentially disrupt the peace of their society. But they also knew that he might hold the key to understanding the true nature of the Genetic Memory Project and the future of humanity. Anya and Elias spent several days with Jax and the naturalists, learning about their way of life and their beliefs. They witnessed their rigorous training exercises, their reverence for nature, and their deep suspicion of the Unity Council. Jax, despite his gruff exterior, proved to be a surprisingly insightful and articulate leader. One evening, as they sat around a crackling campfire, Jax revealed the true reason for the naturalist's paranoia. It wasn't just a philosophical disagreement with the Unity Council. It was a tangible threat that loomed on the horizon. "We've been monitoring subspace communications for years," Jax said, his voice low and serious. "We've detected signals from an alien civilization, a civilization that is far more advanced than our own." Anya and Elias exchanged skeptical glances. The existence of extraterrestrial life was a well-established fact, but first contact had always been peaceful, a meeting of minds and cultures. The idea of a hostile alien civilization seemed like something out of a pre-Unity era science fiction novel. "What makes you think they're hostile?" Anya asked. Jax pulled out a small device and activated it. A holographic projection flickered to life, displaying a series of complex symbols and equations. "These are intercepted communications," Jax explained. "They're encrypted, but we've managed to decipher some of them. They speak of conquest, of domination, of exploiting resources." He showed them images of alien warships, of advanced weaponry, of planetary systems being ravaged by some unknown force. The images were grainy and distorted, but they were undeniably terrifying. "These aliens," Jax continued, "they don't share our pacifist ideals. They see us as weak, as an easy target. They believe that our aversion to war makes us vulnerable." He paused, his eyes scanning the faces of Anya and Elias. "And they're right that we've been genetically engineered to be docile and compliant. We've forgotten how to fight, how to defend ourselves, that we're sitting ducks." Anya felt a chill run down her spine. The simulations she had experienced in the vault, the horrors of the pre-Unity era, suddenly seemed trivial compared to this new threat. The genetic memory project, which had been intended to save humanity, might now be its undoing. "Why haven't you informed the Unity Council?" Elias asked, his voice trembling slightly. Jax scoffed. "The Unity Council? They wouldn't believe us. They're too blinded by their own propaganda. Too convinced of their own infallibility, they dismiss us as conspiracy theorists, as paranoid rebels." He explained that the naturalists had tried to warn the Unity Council in the past, but their warnings had been ignored. They had been labeled as enemies of the state. Their communications were blocked, and their movements were monitored. "We're on our own," Jax said. "If we want to survive, we have to prepare ourselves. That we have to relearn the art of war. We have to rediscover our natural instincts. We have to fight for our freedom." Anya and Elias were overwhelmed by the information. They had come to the wildlands seeking the truth about the genetic memory project, but they had stumbled upon something far more significant, a threat that could potentially destroy everything they knew and loved. They realized that they had a choice to make. They could return to Etheria and try to warn the Unity Council, risking ridicule and imprisonment, or they could join forces with the naturalists and prepare for the coming conflict, embracing a way of life that was antithetical to everything they believed in. The future of humanity, it seemed, rested on their decision. After much deliberation, Anya and Elias decided to return to Etheria. They couldn't, in good conscience, abandon their society to a potential alien invasion. They knew it was a long shot, but they had to try to convince the Unity Council of the impending danger. Their return was met with suspicion and scrutiny. Their unauthorized trip to the wildlands was a clear violation of protocol, and they were immediately summoned to appear before the council. The Unity Council chamber was a vast, circular room bathed in soft, ethereal light. The 12 members of the council sat on elevated platforms, their faces serene and impassive. Elder Theron was among them, his expression unreadable. Anya and Elias presented their findings, starting with their discovery of the genetic memory project and its ethical implications. They then shared Jax's warnings about the approaching alien civilization, presenting the intercepted communications and the grainy images of alien warships. The council members listened in silence, their faces betraying no emotion. When Anya and Elias finished, a long silence hung in the air. Finally, Counselor Lyra, the chair of the council, spoke. "These are serious allegations," she said, her voice measured and calm. "But they are based on circumstantial evidence and the testimony of known dissidents. We understand your skepticism, Anya replied, but we believe that these warnings should be taken seriously. The potential consequences of ignoring them are too great. The Genetic Memory Project was a necessary measure to ensure the survival of humanity. Counselor Marcus interjected, his voice laced with disapproval. It has brought about an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity. We will not allow these unsubstantiated claims to undermine our progress. But what if Jax is right? Elias argued. What if there is a threat on the horizon? Shouldn't we at least consider the possibility of a limited return to defensive capabilities? This sparked a heated debate among the council members. Some argued that any deviation from their pacifist ideals would be a betrayal of everything they stood for. They believed that peace could only be achieved through diplomacy and understanding, not through violence and aggression. Others, including Elder Theron, acknowledged the potential danger and argued for a more cautious approach. They suggested that humanity should explore non-lethal defense technologies and develop strategies for psychological resilience, preparing for potential threats without sacrificing their core values. We cannot simply ignore the possibility of an external threat, Theron said, his voice resonating with authority. We have a responsibility to protect our society, even if it means re-evaluating our long-held beliefs. The debate raged for hours, with council members passionately arguing for their respective positions. Anya and Elias watched in anxious silence, knowing that the fate of humanity hung in the balance. Finally, Counselor Lyra called for a vote. The results were divided, with 6 members voting against any change in policy and 6 members voting in favor of exploring defensive capabilities. The vote was deadlocked. As chair of the council, Counselor Lyra had the power to break the tie. She paused, her face etched with indecision. The weight of the decision was clearly heavy on her shoulders. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. I vote in favor of exploring defensive capabilities. A collective gasp swept through the chamber. Lyra's decision was a monumental shift in policy, a recognition that humanity's aversion to war might have made it vulnerable to external threats. But it was also a controversial decision, one that would undoubtedly spark further debate and division within their society. The first crack in the utopian facade had appeared. Counselor Lyra's decision was only the beginning. The vote to explore defensive capabilities opened a Pandora's box of debate and division within a Therian society. Some hailed it as a necessary step to protect humanity from external threats, while others condemned it as a betrayal of their pacifist ideals. Anya and Elias found themselves at the center of the controversy, thrust into the role of reluctant advocates for change. They were invited to speak at public forums, interviewed by holographic news outlets, and subjected to intense scrutiny from all sides. Anya realized that they needed to find a middle ground, a way to address the potential threat without sacrificing the core values of their society. She proposed a compromise, a strategy that focused on developing non-lethal defense technologies and enhancing psychological resilience. We don't need to become warriors, Anya argued at a public forum, her voice echoing through the vast auditorium. We don't need to embrace violence and aggression, that we can find a better way, a more humane way to protect ourselves. She explained that humanity could invest in technologies that disabled enemy ships without causing casualties, that disrupted their communications without destroying their infrastructure, that defended their cities without resorting to lethal force. She also emphasized the importance of psychological resilience, of preparing the population for the potential trauma of an alien invasion. She proposed the implementation of advanced simulation programs that would allow people to experience realistic scenarios of alien attacks, helping them to develop coping mechanisms and build mental fortitude. We need to remember the lessons of the past, Anya said. The lessons we learned from the pre-Unity era. War is not the answer. Violence is not the solution, that we can protect ourselves without sacrificing our humanity. Her proposal resonated with many people who were wary of returning to the violence and aggression of the past. They saw it as a way to address the potential threat without abandoning their pacifist ideals. However, there were also those who remained skeptical. They argued that non-lethal defense technologies were insufficient to deter a hostile alien civilization and that psychological resilience was no match for superior firepower. They believed that humanity needed to embrace a more aggressive approach, to develop advanced weaponry and train soldiers for combat. Jacques and the naturalists were among the most vocal critics of Anya's proposal. They argued that it was a naive and unrealistic approach, that it would only prolong the inevitable. "You can't reason with a predator," Jacques said during a heated debate with Anya. "You can't negotiate with a conqueror. The only language they understand is force." Anya acknowledged the validity of Jacques's concerns, but she remained convinced that there was a better way. She believed that humanity could demonstrate its strength through diplomacy, through technological innovation, and through unwavering commitment to peace. The Unity Council eventually adopted Anya's proposal, allocating resources to the development of non-lethal defense technologies and the implementation of psychological resilience programs. That IT was a cautious step, a hesitant move towards a more realistic approach to security. But it was a step in the right direction, a recognition that humanity's aversion to war did not mean it had to be defenseless. As the new defense programs were implemented, Anya couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The old simulations she had seen were being repurposed, the data being used to train the population on how to react to potential invasions. Was this progress, or a slippery slope? Only time would tell. The non-lethal defense technologies were slowly being developed, and the psychological resilience programs were being rolled out across Etheria and the other orbital cities. Simulations, once used to study the horrors of human war, were now being used to prepare citizens for the possibility of an alien invasion. Anya, despite her reservations, found herself deeply involved in the process, helping to design the simulations and educate the public about the potential threat. Then, it happened. A signal, unlike anything they had ever encountered, pierced through the subspace communications network. It was a clear, unambiguous message from the alien civilization. They were here. The alien ship, a colossal structure of shimmering metal and pulsating energy, appeared in Earth's orbit, dwarfing even the largest of humanity's orbital cities. It broadcast a message of peace and goodwill, inviting representatives of the Unity Council to a meeting on board the vessel. The Council, after much deliberation, decided to accept the invitation. They sent a delegation of diplomats, scientists, and historians, including Anya and Elder Theron. Elias, deemed too outspoken and rebellious, was left behind. As the delegation approached the alien ship, Anya felt a sense of trepidation. Was this a genuine offer of peace, or a cleverly disguised trap? Was humanity about to face its greatest challenge, or its ultimate demise? The aliens, who called themselves the KRYLL, were humanoid in appearance, but their features were subtly different. Their skin was a pale blue, their eyes were large and black, and their bodies were slender and graceful. They greeted the human delegation with a mixture of curiosity and respect. The initial meetings were cordial and productive. The KRYLL shared their knowledge of science and technology, and the humans shared their art and philosophy. There was a genuine sense of cultural exchange, a feeling that humanity and the KRYLL could coexist peacefully. But as the meetings progressed, Anya began to notice subtle inconsistencies, subtle tests of humanity's resolve. The KRYLL would ask probing questions about their defense capabilities, about their commitment to peace, about their willingness to share their resources. They would present ethical dilemmas, challenging humanity's values and beliefs. One day, the KRYLL presented the human delegation with a request. They needed a rare mineral that was only found on Earth, a mineral that was essential for their survival. They asked for a significant portion of Earth's reserves, a quantity that would have a detrimental impact on humanity's own technological development. The Unity Council was divided. Some argued that humanity should comply with the KRYLL's request, demonstrating their commitment to peace and cooperation. Others argued that humanity should refuse, protecting its own interests and asserting its sovereignty. Anya realized that this was a test. The KRYLL weren't just interested in the mineral, they were interested in humanity's response. They wanted to see if humanity was truly as peaceful and cooperative as it claimed to be, or if it was willing to resort to aggression and self-preservation. The question was, how would humanity respond, and what would be the consequences of its decision? Anya, drawing upon her understanding of pre-Unity-era diplomacy and strategy, proposed a solution to the Unity Council. They would not refuse the KRYLL's request outright. but they would offer an alternative. They would share their technological expertise, enabling the KRYLL to synthesize the mineral themselves, eliminating the need to deplete Earth's resources. It was a risky gamble. The KRYLL could interpret it as a sign of weakness, as an attempt to avoid confrontation. But it was also an opportunity to demonstrate humanity's ingenuity, its commitment to peace, and its unwavering resolve. The Unity Council, after another round of heated debate, reluctantly agreed to Anya's proposal. They presented it to the KRYLL, emphasizing the benefits of collaboration and the potential for mutual growth. The KRYLL were initially skeptical. They questioned the feasibility of the synthesis process and expressed concerns about the long-term implications. But Anya, drawing upon her knowledge of KRYLL technology, presented a compelling argument, demonstrating the efficiency and sustainability of the proposed solution. Finally, the KRYLL agreed to a trial run. Human and KRYLL scientists worked together, pooling their knowledge and resources. The synthesis process proved to be successful, exceeding all expectations. The KRYLL were impressed. They had underestimated humanity's technological prowess and its commitment to peaceful solutions. They realized that humanity was not the weak and vulnerable species they had initially perceived. They withdrew their request for Earth's mineral reserves and instead proposed a long-term partnership, a collaboration that would benefit both civilizations. They shared their advanced technologies, helping humanity to overcome its environmental challenges and explore the vast expanse of the universe. The alien ship, once a symbol of potential destruction, became a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of diplomacy and understanding. The threat of invasion receded, replaced by a new era of cooperation and mutual respect. Anya, watching the KRYLL ship depart from Earth's orbit, felt a sense of profound relief. Humanity had passed the test. That IT had demonstrated its strength through diplomacy and preparedness, not through aggression and violence. She understood that true peace required vigilance, a constant awareness of potential threats, and a willingness to adapt and evolve. IT also required an understanding of the past, even the violent parts, to learn from the mistakes of previous generations and to avoid repeating them. The Genetic Memory Project, while ethically questionable, had served its purpose. That IT had helped to create a society that valued peace and cooperation, a society that was willing to explore nonviolent solutions to conflict. But Anya also realized that humanity couldn't rely solely on genetic engineering to maintain its peace. That IT needed to cultivate its capacity for critical thinking, its willingness to challenge the status quo, and its unwavering commitment to justice and equality. She returned to her office at the Grand Archive, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that her work was far from over. There were still many questions to be answered, many truths to be uncovered. She looked at the data crystals lining the walls, the faces of the soldiers, the victims, the perpetrators. They no longer mocked her. They inspired her, reminding her of the importance of understanding the past, of learning from its mistakes, and of striving to create a better future for all of humanity. The key to lasting peace, she realized, lay not in erasing the past, but in understanding it, in grappling with its complexities, and in using its lessons to build a more just and equitable world. And humanity, despite its engineered tendencies, had proven it was still capable of that difficult task. The choice, ultimately, still belonged to them.